Hi, I'm Victor Purton, the Chief Optimism Officer for the Centre for Optimism, and we're here today to celebrate the optimism and innovation of Bendigo and the region that surrounds it. And I'd like to welcome Margaret O'Rourke, the Mayor of Bendigo, and Mary Dwyer, who is a leadership guru and peacemaker around the world. It's a delight to have you here, Margaret. Welcome.
Thank you, Victor, and hello, Mary.
Hello, Maggie. Lovely to see you again.
Well, this conversation is a real small world story. Mary has published a new book, and I'd asked Mary to come on the Optimism Café. She said, look, I don't want to do this on my own. I much prefer speaking in a group. Can I ask one of my best friends? Well, who should that best friend be but Margaret O'Rourke? Whether it was God talking, spirituality, the circumstances of the world. So, Mary, how did you two meet?
Oh, Maggie and I were just speaking about that last night and trying to remember, because it sort of feels like Maggie's been there for a long time in my life. And in fact, when we go back to when we first met, which was at Rotary, the Rotary Club of Hobart, and we were some of the very first women to join Rotary. In fact, Margie, were you the very first woman?
No, I wasn't. There were a couple of others, but it was, there was, less than 5, I think.
Less than 5. So we were groundbreaking, really. And they asked us to be Sergeant of Arms, but both Margie and I were working really big jobs at the time. And so we decided that we would collaborate and we would share that role. And that in itself for Rotary was something that was really new, but they agreed, and so we can say the rest is history, and it's forged a beautiful relationship, even though we don't see each other that often at the moment.
So in these optimism cafes and conversations, the most critical question we ask everyone is, what makes you optimistic? So Margaret, may I ask you, what makes you optimistic?
I think for me, Victor, it is inbuilt to me, I have to say. I think I'm an optimistic person anyway, and I always look at a glass half full. It's just how I operate. But I also think that it's something that happens in me, and Mary, I'm sure, will have seen examples where I get a level of dissatisfaction, and my optimism, and that's probably how I would describe it, makes me do something about it. So I tend to then want to make a change and want to look at the possibilities. And so for me, optimism is around those possibilities, looking at options, looking at solutions. And when I do get that level of dissatisfaction, it's very often that I actually step up. It actually makes me step up or lean into a circumstance. And I really do look at that as being part of my makeup, and that optimism is a big part of me.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly that connection to action, that's what makes it so powerful for you to be that infectiously optimistic leader. It's believing that the opportunity is there and then taking action. I think that's what makes you so successful, Margaret. So, Mary, what makes you optimistic?
Probably I'd have to say the same as Margie, the glass half full, but for me that's much more learnt. I think that's learnt behaviour. And I can remember in my very first career, and I was a junior nurse, and I can remember going to my dad and telling him about a situation that I saw in the hospital, which I just thought was wrong, was unjust, was unfair. And my dad saying, well, what are you going to do about it, Missy? And that's so similar to Margie. Who am I going to be in the world? And am I going to be one of the people who keep on lobbing grenades, so to speak, as the worker from the outside? Or how do I grow myself as a leader so I can have a voice that changes and influences the narrative? If I don't like what I see, what am I going to do about it? So, and what makes me optimistic at the moment is at this point in time, I think we have got an opportunity to change the level of consciousness that we're working from as a human species, really, and especially in our young people. Some of our young people, they keep me optimistic because of what their innovation, actually, and what they see as possible for the world, and their intelligence. They are infinitely more intelligent than I am. And some of their willingness and their enthusiasm to be an articulate, intelligent voice for change, for positive change, that actually cares for all of humanity, not just, we're moving beyond just us, just us. So how do we care for all of humanity? So engaging with our younger leaders, I find incredibly inspiring.
Mary, I couldn't agree more in terms of your views around young people. And since being on council, one of the things that I'm most proud of, and our councillors, is that we have put together a youth council. And so we have, over the last 3 years, we've got 18 young people, and we've had some changeover as they went to university and so on. They are extraordinary, and exactly how you describe them, it just gives you so much hope, and they look at things so differently to us. And, the level of optimism even in their journey of what they've been doing for us, because we don't have young people on council. It's pretty hard, and the hours that you put in are significant, a minimum of at least 20 hours a week. And this has been a great way to tap into our younger community. And the feedback we're getting in that sort of 18 to 35 age group in terms of various feedback surveys has been really positive. And I think they're so optimistic in terms of the things that they're looking for the future. I really can resonate with those comments, Mary.
And Margaret, you're Deputy Chair of the Kangan and Bendigo TAFE. I always think of TAFE as a font of innovation and invention. What are you seeing in those, both young and old, in that TAFE and in Bendigo that's doing so well?
At this period in time, Bendigo Kangan Institute's going through a real transformation, and that's very exciting. And it's taken a long time, there's no doubt about it. And we're unique in that we've got a regional TAFE and a metropolitan TAFE that have come together, so a hybrid. It's the only hybrid model in Victoria. And for Mary's knowledge, there's 12 TAFEs in Victoria, Mary, so Tasmania has one, obviously, and other states have one. We have a lot more, and that makes it difficult too because it's competitive against other TAFEs also. But I have to be honest and say there's a real can-do attitude that's happening within our TAFE at Bendigo Kangan. And even where we're heading through the COVID scenario, like TAFE is an essential service. So the state government have said that it's an essential service. The amount of young people, even their level of connectivity and coming in and being online to do their courses and so on has gone up quite significantly, because they're obviously in lockdown and they realise how important this is. Not that it wasn't before, but I think it's about that optimistic outlook of I need to get trained while I'm in this time. I need to see what I can find in terms of employment going forward. And that's not just about young people, that's a whole range of people. So I think we're on the cusp of our TAFEs going to another level, to be honest, and I think COVID's a little bit of the catalyst for that too. You imagine getting so many staff to be able to work from home online. That's programs in all businesses right across the world that have had programs of probably 2 to 5 years of getting their staff online. People have done it in 3 weeks and, 6 weeks, and now we've got people working online because that can-do attitude of when your back is against the wall, you can do it. And I'd have to say I'm really, really excited about what the future holds for TAFE, Victor, very much so.
So, Margaret, you talked about the pandemic, and of course, the news is full of scoreboards of death and every bad consequence. But you just pointed to the fact that we've made this incredible rapid transition to being able to work from anywhere. So you're both renowned for being realistic and infectiously optimistic leaders. So how have you led through the pandemic, and what's the vision for beyond the pandemic?
I'm happy to go first if you want, Mary. I think all of us, well, for me certainly, we could see this coming on the horizon. We didn't know the impact that it would have, and I think because Australia is so far from anywhere, I think we always felt like it was happening in other places will it come to us, and it was inevitable. And I have to say, well done to all levels of government, because I think they have done an extraordinary job. And for me, this is not political and should never be political. So I get pretty frustrated when people take cheap shots. But I have to say our Prime Minister and for us in Victoria, our Premier have been outstanding. And for us in local government, our role is slightly different because obviously we take directions from both levels of government a lot. But in terms of locally, I've been doing, I was doing daily updates when we were in the real height of lockdown, and I'm now moving back to doing weekly ones. So I've had a lot of people in the community say thank you for doing that. Thank you for keeping us up to date, because for me, one of the big things is about communication. It's people not knowing, and no, I'm not a medical expert and I'll absolutely leave that to the experts, but if I can reinforce their messages, that's what I do. But I also want people to understand that there is a future for us, and we will have to have a new normal, and we are working in a new normal. There's going to be outbreaks, and now in Victoria we see that Melbourne and Mitchell Shire, which neighbours us actually, we have a boundary with Mitchell Shire, and they are in lockdown. And I rang the Mayor from Mitchell the other day as soon as it was announced. Like, I didn't know what we could do for him, but I wanted him to know that we were thinking of him. We've got a neighbouring boundary. If there's something we can do to help, we're here. And that's what we all have to do. We are in this together, and I know that can be a bit of a catch cry for people, but you know what? It's true, and we have to work through this. We've got to rise above and look for the best outcomes that we can. We've had too many deaths, you know, and it's really heartbreaking when you hear the numbers every day, and we just have to keep reinforcing what people need to do in terms of their social distancing, their hand hygiene, and we just have to hope that there will be a vaccine, because that will really be the only way we're going to see this change. Again, I'll just say the leaders of our country, I think we need to be very proud of what they've done, and we need to make sure that that continues and it doesn't get lost in that discussion and debate about point scoring.
Beautifully expressed. So, Mary, you're in Tasmania. You're cut off from a lot of Australia and the rest of the world, and yet you maintain your global role in leadership and peacemaking. How have you found leading through the pandemic, and what do you see, your best self coming out of it?
If I pick up on what Margie was saying, just that act of ringing the Mayor, picking up the phone and saying, I don't know what we can do, but how can we help? And I'm here for you. And basically that's all I've done, but to leaders from around the world. And leaning in and just saying, this is an incredibly complex time. It is most likely from a leadership perspective that our reactive behaviours will come to the fore. So, number one, start to be really conscious of those. Elevate your own consciousness to, what is your reactivity that wants to relieve the tension and the suffering that we're seeing in the world, and how do we consciously every single day, and what are you going to do as a leader to consciously every single day place yourself emotionally and, for me, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in the best possible stance or hold yourself so that the enormous decisions that you're making are not coming from a place of fear and reaction, but are coming from a place of being deeply considered, but with a need to act incredibly fast. And as Margie said, I think all levels of government, especially Dan Andrews at the moment, all levels of government, though, what an extraordinary job that they've done. And Premier Gutwin here in Tasmania, I haven't seen leadership of this calibre for a long time. And here it is, across different levels of government. And there's just something really simple. We talk about us being grounded in a practical reality. Sometimes I just really hold, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And if you're going to pass something on, is that message positive, and is that message serving to help or serving to destroy? So there's an example of just being incredibly practical and grounded on a very simple level, and it doesn't matter who I'm speaking with, then that will, that is a message that I keep on saying. What can you say that's really positive? How can you really nurture yourself during this time? Be aware of your own reactive tendencies, manage your own fear, look after your own anxiety, because otherwise we keep on projecting that. So
very true, Mary. It's interesting when you look at leadership, as we all do every day. For me, leadership, optimism and leadership go hand in hand. Like, I look at the leaders that I think are good leaders, and they are optimistic people. They want to see the possibilities. They want to look for the solutions. And leadership is tough and hard. And look what they're dealing with at the moment. It is so hard. And no matter if it's just even a local issue in your community, leadership is hard because there's always a view one way or the other. And I think that not always a solution right there, but it might be around the corner. But to me, leadership and optimism, I feel, go very, very closely hand in hand.
Well, of course, that's the how we started the Centre for Optimism. We'd had the Australian Leadership Project and interviewed 2,500 people on the qualities of Australian leadership. And, it's egalitarianism. Our Prime Minister drives in the front seat of the car, not the back seat. We talk to the cleaner the same way we talk to the chairman. Self-effacing humour, the laughter and the smiles of each of you epitomise it, and no bullshit plain speaking. Now, if those are the qualities of Australian leadership, there are millions of people like that. And so we started the Centre for Optimism to help penetrate the fog of pessimism. And that's what we need to do. And you two leaders, are beacons in that fog. So I'm so proud to be with you. Australian news media these days is characterised by negative news and criticism. So, Margaret, you must wear that as the mayor.
In those real times of difficulty and when you're challenged, and it's that belief in yourself in terms of where you're at. And I analyse that belief at times, which I think is a really good thing to do. It's about auditing yourself, making sure that you're not tone deaf to the things around you, making sure you've got all that information. And, we talk about EQ a lot in leadership, and I feel that that's the times when I test that internally. But having that belief and holding my line, because as I've said, often leadership is unpopular. Often the hard decisions are really difficult. And so for me, it is about calm and strong. It's something that has taken, I think, something that I've matured into. I wouldn't say I was like that in my 20s, but it's something that I've grown into and a belief that I have gathered. My life has not been a bed of roses. No. And I've had times in my younger days, I lost my mum at 17. There's been challenges. Everyone has them. But I don't go out there and put out my I don't put that shingle out there. It's what makes me who I am. And so, calm and strong, I think, is going to hold me in good stead forever. That's how I look at it.
There's some very good science out of the United States that says you don't reach peak optimism until you're in your 50s or 60s. That it's being able to frame the normal anxieties of life into, life goes on. The best definition of optimism is a belief that good things will happen and that everything will work out in the end. And if it hasn't worked out, it's not the end. And I think you epitomise that. You, in your 20s, that's actually quite hard. In your 60s or 50s or 60s, it becomes easier. And as you said, you've matured into it. So, Mary, where do you draw your well? What is in there? How do you fill it in order to keep working in that tough field of peacemaking and international leadership?
If I just pick up on everything that Margie said, I would absolutely like to endorse what you've just shared, Margie, that keeps you constantly being able to step into the leadership the way that you do. For me also, my guiding values are love, care, compassion, grace and wisdom. They weren't always that. I think the more that I can stay in love and kindness, the more that I get a solution that is beyond what I would have thought. And in order for that knowledge to come through, I spend time now in silence and meditation, and that is a daily practice for me. And sometimes that meditation might be walking on the beach. That is a meditation. Walking on the beach can be a meditation. Sometimes it might be inactive meditation. Sometimes it may be in something like a spiritual conversation. And I would say that this is a spirit, because we're bringing our spirit of who we are as leaders into this conversation. And that then becomes something much different than just a conversation between three people about even innovation. So for me, I am nurtured by something that is not from me, and I can only listen to that or hear that if I spend time when I'm quiet.
Margaret, I'm really excited about coming to Bendigo soon for the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival and celebrating, that wonderful Bendigo ethos, whether it's food and wine or manufacturing. It's just a wonderful hub of entrepreneurship, invention and innovation. So you are both renowned for your innovations, both in business and government. So, Margaret, what do you see as the connection between optimism and innovation?
I see that it's very close, Victor, to be honest, and almost blend into each other in many ways. It's funny, when you grow up in a town like I did here, I was born in Bendigo. I left when I was in my early 30s and worked all around Australia with my roles, and then spent 7 years in Tasmania. When I came back in 2006, I'd been back and forward a lot to visit family, of course, but when I came back in 2006, I just couldn't believe, and I hadn't seen it before, I suppose, that real can-do attitude that Bendigo has. And there is this real depth, and I often describe it, it's in our DNA. Like, even before I was on council, I could pick up the phone to various leaders in town, and if there was an issue that people needed to get advice on or needed to bring a group together, we can do it in an hour. And it's quite remarkable. And all the places I've worked, I've never seen it like I have here. And I think that partly blends into the innovation of what people want to do in Bendigo also. And someone that you know, Victor, obviously, Paul Chapman. And I know that you'll interview Paul and chat to Paul. If ever there's a man with an absolute dose and a half of optimism, that's Paul. And, his outlook in life is incredible. And he's really driven the innovation activities. We've got the Bendigo Manufacturing Group that have got a much broader group now. These are people that have been working together for 20 years. That council have actually worked with them over that time, but they have grown and grown. And our manufacturing sector here in Greater Bendigo is really strong, and particularly when in advanced manufacturing, and particularly when a lot of other places have really, been hit hard for various reasons over the years, they have remained really strong, and they are a really optimistic group of people. And Paul is part of that group. But there are many of these examples in Bendigo. And yes, you'll always have people that are worried about the future, are not as resilient as what other people are. But I think by and large, what I see is a very innovative community. I think a very exciting community, and they just keep reaching further and further. And whatever challenges come up, they work on a solution, they work through it.
I think the other thing is the extraordinary global nature of that innovation and optimism from Bendigo. And I think of Paul Chapman's stories of selling his turntables in Iran and Azerbaijan and North America and Europe. And he's that very Australian leader, the a real Aussie, just, and you look at your winemakers and your food production people. Bendigo is the great hub of global entrepreneurship and innovation.
It sure is. Like, they export to over 50 countries around the world. Another example is the City of Gastronomy. So UNESCO City of Gastronomy, first City of Gastronomy announced in Australia. It's the only category that's actually a region. So there's 9 municipalities that have come together. There isn't a product of food, wine, primary production, beverage, like everything you can think of that doesn't come out of that region. Now, when that was first talked about within our organisation, or the council organisation, but the community more importantly, because it was driven by a lot of people in the community, I can remember thinking, oh, really? Do we really think that we can be a city of gastronomy? Like, we invented the Chico roll. Like, you can imagine the conversations that have happened and taken place. And you start to work through it, and you start to look at the opportunities. And we have our Dja Dja Wurrung community, our Indigenous, First Nation people are very, very much a part of this, And so when we actually started to map this out, Trevor Budge at the City of Greater Bendigo, another person that is an extremely great leader and very optimistic, we all came together and started to map out what this, category might be, and they're very hard to get. And there was a large number of the community that worked with the City of Greater Bendigo on this bid. And as I said, our Indigenous community, Rodney Carter, who heads up our Dja Dja Wurrung, as the CEO of the corporation, they have 6 seasons of how they produce their food. And, when you think 60,000 years that they have been, at least, and what we have been learning from Rodney and his people has been incredible. And all of that coming together, I think, made us work really hard about what we wanted to share and showcase. And when you say we're a hub, we certainly are, Victor, but we're a hub as a region as well. So all our surrounding municipalities, that we work together so closely, and we were thrilled when we got that UNESCO announcement last year, and what that's going to do and what it's already doing in bringing the community together, and bringing a lot of our businesses, our producers, it's making a real difference, and we've only just scratched the surface. So that optimism around that, and that was something that was so far out in the distance. And like I say, it's not around the first corner that you see these things, but when you keep talking about it and you keep believing in what you need to do, it will happen. And that's another great example.
Well, as you say, when you think of how the Aboriginal people adapted to the Australian landscape, and the innovation over tens of thousands of years, it's still reflected in our life today. And look, when I was just browsing through the internet, I stumbled across Bendigo Senior Secondary College's values. And their values include optimism. And they, as a core value, and they say being enthusiastic in our living, learning and contributing, embracing opportunities to make a difference, being resilient and persistent in adversity. Now, at least, more than 1,000 children have graduated from that school with that set of values. And the principal has said to me, it is absolutely embedded in the ethos of the school. So, it's a chicken and the egg, isn't it? Is Bendigo Senior Secondary College optimistic because it's in Bendigo, or has it contributed to making Bendigo a more optimistic city? So, Margaret, as the Mayor, would you call Bendigo an optimistic city?
Yes, I would, Victor. And I don't have any hesitation in saying that, because by and large, I think absolutely we are. And senior secondary is a great example. So we have a model here in public education where our 4 schools of 7 to 10, and then they go into being senior secondary, which is in the centre of town in Rosalind Park. So if people are familiar with Greater Bendigo, in our beautiful centre of town, they're in a fantastic location. And, you know, there's close to 2,000 students that go there. So year 11 and 12, it's the largest senior secondary college in Victoria, actually. And I just say that I think what Dale's done there in terms of the values that he's trying to bring to the fore, and optimism is a big part of that. But I do see that in the way in which people look at Bendigo. You know, you're your own harshest critic internally. You know, like people who live in a place all their life, they can see the things that aren't so good about it. But when you hear from people, and as I do as mayor, like I walk along the street, people stop me and people tell me that they've moved to Bendigo, and I love hearing those stories because I think, what brought you here? Like, I'm here because I was born here, I've got family here, that's why I came back here. What brings you here with no relationship to Bendigo? And that's the thing that I like to hear, those stories. And it is about the place. It's about what they see. It's about the environment around them. It's about the outlook, and it's about the optimism. There is those comments are said to me regularly. It's about the arts that we've nurtured. It's about great health services that we've got here. You know, a significant hospital that was opened only a couple of years ago, $1.1 billion regional hospital here in Bendigo. There's so many strong, positive things that brings people here for all different reasons. But I think the basis of it, Victor, is also about the optimistic outlook as well.
Yeah, sometimes people mistake Australian language. So we're very self-critical, you know, so we're always worried that we're not as good as Europe, or we're not as good as America, or we're not as good as Asia. And so there's this self-criticism, and sometimes people mistake that for negativity. But oftentimes, if it can be harnessed, it's a great source for good. And that's why Australia's #1 on the United Nations Development Index, the OECD Good Life Index, 5 of our cities in the top 15 on the Economist ranking for livability, and your city reaching out to be a UNESCO hub. It just says so much about what we can do. So, look, can I turn again to Mary and her incredible work? So, Mary, you've got a new book called The Final Act of Grace. And I recently attended a webinar, you know, where you spoke, and people were just enchanted by the stories. So can you tell us about that book and what brought you to write it?
Well, first of all, it was a long time coming. It took me 10 years to write it, because it is essentially about my late husband, Adrian Beardsley. And Adrian got cancer, and it spread to the base of his brain, and he decided that he would not have any other treatment, but he would die a conscious death. So he chose to die. And what that meant for him was to use all of the leadership skills, really, that he had spent his life teaching and growing and developing in himself, to basically let go, but consciously. And he was amazing. He was amazing. But as he was dying, he kept on almost like stopping the death process and coming back and telling us what was happening to him as he was dying. And my first career was as a nurse, and I specialised in palliative care nursing. So I've helped a lot of people die and seen a lot of people die, but I'd never seen something like this. And I remember that there was one point, our 2 children, Jack was 19, Ella was 17, and there was one point where Adrian looked unconscious, but then he came back and he just started laughing, and he said, "It's just like the movies. You know, there is a tunnel and I've got blurred vision." And he was just he was in delight. He was in delight. But probably what was more incredible, and what I would now say is a miracle, is that he came back after he died. And that took me a long time to write about, especially because of my role as CEO of Impact Solutions International, doing global leadership work. And here I am telling a story of a dead man, or the spirit of a man who came back and spoke to not just myself, but my son. And Margie knows my son, and he's a hardcore scientist, incredibly logical and analytical, amazing brain. And he came back, and what Adrian had told me that it had happened after he died, Jack threw open the door about 6:30 in the morning, goes, Mum, Dad's okay, Dad's okay. After he died, he went to, and there were about 10 different places, and he repeated word for word what Adrian had said to me. And I wrestled with that for so long. But in the end, I think I held, what if that was true? What if that was true? What if that was true? And he came back and he just said, it's more beautiful. It's more beautiful and it's more amazing than anything we'd ever wondered about or inquired about. And he said a couple of things like, it's about love. It's about being able to give love and receive love. It's not okay if we just can give love. We can't become whole human beings unless we can also really receive love. So obviously, that's a big story to share, especially in the platform of being a CEO of a business development, leadership development company. But in the end, it was like, well, it's profoundly changed my life, and it changed my life for the better. And what he gave back in his words of wisdom has infinitely helped me become a nicer and more effective leader. So if it was beneficial for me, maybe it's beneficial for other people, and maybe it's actually really true. So, yeah, hence the final act of grace came out. And it's been
book, and worth reading. There are two things that really strike me in what you say. And one is the importance of dying a good death, of being an optimist in death and transmitting optimism to your children and grandchildren and friends. And I remember a fellow asked me to give him a roast at his 80th birthday. And, it was a huge audience, a couple of hundred people he'd invited, but he was auditioning me for his funeral.
Okay.
He actually wanted his funeral to be a celebration of humour and joy. And the point you make on that, and the second point, obviously I've been studying optimism now for years, is the importance of faith and spirituality to optimism. Yeah. You don't need to believe in God, to be an optimist. There are many optimistic atheists. Mary, in writing that book, you've done a great service to the world. And I can see why the two of you are just such obviously great friends, reinforcing each other's optimism and leadership. So look, on behalf of everyone who's participated in this, this has been such a rich conversation. I'm glad you both wore orange. We're making the colour of optimism orange for Bendigo and Tasmania and Melbourne. And is there something, reflecting on this conversation, each of you would like to leave with our audience? Margaret?
Look, I just think even this conversation today, Victor, we've traversed a lot in that, and the energy that it brings, the energy and the I just think it makes you want to do more. And I feel that that's the overpowering thing for me, is optimism really creates people wanting to do more and that action. So, I would hope that, whomever decides that they want to watch this today, that they are energised by our conversation. And you can take total control of this in no matter what you do or where you're going. And as I said, it won't always be apparent in that first sort of looking forward. It'll be around the corner or whatever. But I think that optimism and leadership for me goes hand in hand, and I hope people are energised by our discussion.
Mm.
And Mary?
Very similar to Margie. I mean, the having different conversations, and having conversations that cause our spirit to rise, us to rise, and invoke us to be leaders that are different. And something just came to mind. It was after Adrian died. The next morning, it was, how am I going to be today? How am I going to be when I put my feet on the floor? Because how I'm going to be, especially for my children, might shape their whole future. And I can remember consciously sitting on the side of the bed, and my feet weren't quite on the floor, then just going, I'm going to be in love and grace today. So what I would leave us with is, whatever the way that you would really like to shape your life, just consciously every morning, what value, whether it's optimism or love or grace or wisdom, but what are you going to put your feet on the floor with today, and what would it be like if you really led from that stance? So, Margie, just lovely to see you again.
I'd agree. It's been fantastic. And one of the things that it's remiss that I didn't share this, and I will. It's a bit of an inner secret for me that I'm happy to share. Calm and strong is one of my mantras that has been my mantra for a long, long time. And it was to do with some training that I had, probably 25 years ago. And when we talk about these levels of dissatisfaction or change, or how we're going to be when we put our feet on the floor this morning, when you're challenged internally, calm and strong. And I think that has always held me in good stead, and it's what I use each and every day.
Well, my mother is 92, and her mantra, and she stopped teaching only at the end of last year, her mantra has been, calm and strong, I manage my life. And she was a refugee, widowed twice, and working 3 jobs, and worked through in her own way to the age of 92. So that resonates with me. And to you in the audience, gratitude is a big underpinning of optimism. So I'd like you both to Google both Margaret and Mary. They're both easy to find on the internet. Whiz them an email and say, look, thank you, but also have a think about how we can support their work, because Margaret is building just one of the centres of global civilization in Bendigo, and she is the leader. And Mary spreading this message of spirituality and peacemaking globally through good leadership. Again, both of these people deserve your support and would welcome your participation, whatever they're doing. So on behalf of the Centre for Optimism, the City of Greater Bendigo, we're celebrating optimism and innovation in Bendigo, and I thank you all for joining us today. And Margaret and Mary, have a wonderful day.
Great. Thanks, Victor. And lovely to see you, Mary. Well done.
Thank you.